Her name was Margaret. Life and Death on the Streets. Written by Denise Davy. Narrated by Sean Webb. Chapter 1. Nobody Came. December 6, 1995, Hamilton. The woman was dangling off the edge of her chair, arms flailing about like a wild animal. She tried desperately to grab the side of the table, but wasn't strong enough to pull herself back upright. She had wandered into this sub shop about 20 minutes ago wearing thin, tattered clothes with a blanket draped over her shoulders, perhaps placed there by a kind stranger who took pity on the homeless woman. Her brown hair was a matted mess and her face was deeply lined, like a landscape over which rough weather had passed. She had bought herself a cup of tea and settled into the small table by the door, cupping the tea in her hands and letting the steam drift over her face. Every once in a while she rested her weary head on the table, as if it were too heavy to hold up. From behind the counter, Claudette Gaudry could see that the woman needed to warm up, and decided to let her stay. She was relieved the woman had found shelter on this wretched December night when temperatures had dipped below freezing. Then customers began complaining about the bag lady, who was smoking up a storm. "She needs to go," one man sternly told Claudette. Claudette reluctantly walked over to the woman and asked her to leave. She was surprised when the woman refused to go. She hadn't expected such stubbornness from someone so frail. When Claudette asked again, the woman waved her away. Claudette tried one more time. This time, the woman ignored her. It was 6:48 p.m. when Claudette made the first call to 911. 911, what's your emergency? There's a bum off the streets who's making a nuisance of herself, Claudette told the dispatcher. We don't keep that kind of clientele in our store. Claudette was in her early 20s, a soft-spoken young woman with an easygoing, forgiving smile. Later she would question why she referred to the woman as a bum, something that would haunt her long after this ordeal had ended. The sub-shop was in a quiet L-shaped strip plaza in the east end of Hamilton, Ontario, a few kilometers from downtown, squeezed alongside a convenience store and a check-cashing business. 15 minutes after Claudette made the 911 call, there was still no sign of police, so she called again. The dispatcher told her there'd been a delay because of a shift change, and assured her it won't be much longer. Another 10 minutes passed and no one showed. Then the woman suddenly became wedged between the chair and table. Claudette thought maybe she bent down to pick something up and got stuck. Her bony body was dangling over the side of the chair, her arms and legs flying in every direction. Claudette grabbed the phone and called 911 a third time. The woman is now in trouble, Claudette yelled into the phone. She is stuck in the chair and can't get up. Help is on the way, the dispatcher told her again. Suddenly the woman started to scream, loud, raspy cries that filled the shop. Help, help, she yelled, still struggling with the table. Just then the woman started banging her head against the window, perhaps trying to call attention to her plight. Bang, bang, bang. The disturbing sound filled the shop. No one stepped forward. Over and over she hit her head while flinging her arm to grab the table. There was still no sign of police, still no offers of help. Suddenly, there was a thud. The yelling stopped. The woman had collapsed and fallen off her chair. Her head collided with the floor. Blood began oozing from her head. Claudette frantically grabbed the phone again. It was now 7:47 p.m., a full hour after the first call was placed. Where are they? She just bumped her head and now she's bleeding, Claudette yelled into the phone. Blood is coming out of her nose or off her face. I don't know what to do. Again, the dispatcher told her police were on the way. Don't move her. The call should by this point have been escalated from a nuisance call to a life and death emergency, which requires that police act immediately. But where were they? Claudette stared at the woman's lifeless body. Blood was soaking into her matted hair and spreading across the floor. Claudette felt helpless and desperate. Oh my God, what if she dies, she thought. 12 more minutes passed. It was 7:59 p.m. A halo of blood now surrounded the woman's head as she lay motionless on the floor. Claudette made another frantic call. I have a woman lying on the ground, she screamed into the phone. Lying in my Mr. Sub on the corner of King and Emerald. She's lying there bleeding from her head. She's been there for about an hour. We called earlier and they told us we couldn't move her. They said they'd send someone and they still haven't sent anyone. By now most people had left. Claudette feared the woman was dead. The silence in the shop was deafening. She reached for the phone, just as a police car and ambulance pulled up. Claudette held her breath and watched as the paramedic knelt down beside the woman and checked her pulse. She's alive, she heard them say. Claudette breathed a sigh of relief. The paramedic cut through the woman's red tattered cardigan and black blouse and hooked her up to an intravenous that wrapped a cervical collar around her neck and placed her limp body on the stretcher. She was put in the ambulance and rushed to Hamilton General Hospital, a 5-minute drive away. Shortly after she arrived, the woman went into cardiac arrest. Doctors were unable to revive her. At 9:53 p.m., 3 hours after the first 911 call, the woman was pronounced dead. Staff searched her clothing but couldn't find any ID. She was a patient without a name. Then an observant nurse recognized her as the homeless woman who was written up in the Hamilton Spectator. Had the nurse not been there that night at that exact time, the woman may well have died unknown and nameless. Her name was Margaret Louise Jacobson. She was 51 years old, although the coroner's report from the autopsy conducted the next day would reveal that her body resembled someone much older. 1 year on the streets is like a lifetime anywhere else. Margaret was 5 foot 4 inches tall, 53 kilograms, or 160 pounds, and was described as seriously malnourished. She had no teeth in her upper jaw and missing many in the lower. There was bruising on her head and a cut on her left eyebrow. The skin on her face was described as leathery and pitted, and the cancer that had started in her right breast years earlier had spread so extensively through her upper body that the skin under her arms stuck to her ribs. The autopsy stated that Margaret went into cardiac arrest shortly after arriving at the hospital and that she died from a ruptured dissecting aneurysm, the same condition that killed one of her brothers. Death was ruled natural causes. When police returned to the sub shop and told Claudette the news, she broke down and cried. She was wrought with guilt for referring to Margaret as a bum. She had seen the legions of homeless people on the streets and knew they were the city's forgotten souls. She agonized about what she could have done differently and became so distraught that she missed time from work as she tried to process it all. I just felt so helpless, Claudette told me for the Spectator story. I just kept telling her help was on the way, but nobody came. Hoping for closure, Claudette ordered a copy of the 911 transcript. Maybe it would tell her something she didn't know. Maybe she hadn't called as many times as she thought. Police turned down her request on the basis that it was a breach of confidentiality, but Claudette appealed the decision to the Freedom of Information's provincial office, and the denial was overturned. The transcript showed Claudette what she already knew, that she had called 911 a total of 5 times, and that it had taken police more than an hour to get there, even after the call had been elevated to an emergency. The Hamilton Wentworth Regional Police Department's response was that the calls were initially classified as low priority or number 3 because there were reports of an unwanted person, also referred to as nuisance calls. And while the policy stated that a number 3 low priority call must be answered within an hour, according to police, those calls are susceptible to being bumped by another. Even though the call had been upgraded, police still concluded they had followed protocol. Claudette could see from Margaret's sick, worn-out appearance that she'd been severely overlooked and neglected during her life. Sadly, the same thing happened with her death. It's not known how many homeless people died the same year as Margaret. Like most municipalities, Hamilton doesn't track homeless deaths. They didn't track them the year that Margaret died, and they still don't track them today. That's been a hindrance to social service agencies, who without data on seasonal, geographic trends and causes of deaths, don't know the full scope of the homelessness crisis and what services are needed. It means the full picture is missing, and that many homeless people are disappearing like ghosts. In death, as in life, they are invisible.